Excellent. Let us start off. So, bonjour à tous, and welcome everyone again to our conversation starting off today. Just wanted to take a moment to express our gratitude on behalf of the entire CAAM team for joining us here on our CAAM Quarterly Town Hall. So, as always, it's great to be back speaking with our growing ecosystem. And we know that this space that we're creating is to launch for our content on the advanced air mobility work coming across Canada. And we know in order to connect with all of us here today, we wanted to start with just a quick warm-up question. So as we gather and join into our conversations, please take a moment, go into the chat for everyone to see so that we can have some of our gatherings here. We've got our quick warm-up question, knowing that we're going into our summer travel season. For those that have the opportunity to travel during the summertime, please let us know your next airport destination for your confirmed flight. We want to see some of our airports out there to bring us some connections across the country. So let's get some chat flowing there and some of the connections. Where is your next airport destination for a confirmed flight? Excellent. Thanks so much, Danny. Great there, Karen. Thanks for sharing. Wonderful, Angelica. Great. Reno. Okay, we got some good ones there. Perfect. So as we chat and continue to build those connections, for initial introductions, my name is J.R. Hammond, and I'm privileged to serve as the Executive Director for CAAM, our federal, not-for-profit Canadian Advanced Air Mobility, co-founded with the National Research Council of Canada. And alongside me today, we have our incredible CAAM team of our marketing manager, David Dong, and our chief of staff, Theo Robson, supporting us behind the scenes. So as we dive in, we want to thank you for joining our quarterly CAAM Town Hall, your first stop shop for advanced air mobility updates on operations, policy, and regulation for advanced air mobility in Canada. Each of these town halls are continuing to feature the key updates in the field of advanced air mobility from both our national authorities as we progress towards operations in Canada. And as shared in our last town hall, 2024 for CAAM has been about the launch of our 5-year plan towards operationalization. As the national authoritative voice for advanced air mobility in the country, we're unifying the industry together to identify those opportunities, the concerns, and challenges as we spearhead this path towards operations in lockstep with our national authorities. So we're grateful to have you here again today, and thank you once again for your role in bringing operations across the country. So now we also have to acknowledge that during Indigenous History Month, this digital event is being hosted on the unceded and traditional ancestral territories of the countless First Nations across Canada. And collectively, at CAAM and as settlers, we recognize our duty and responsibility to the decolonization, reconciliation, and the equitable use of our future air resources. Never has it been more important to take these learnings of the development of the future air resources and apply the lens of reconciliation across them. This is one of the drawings shared and we wanted to share and promote from Coon Creations, who led the Bead Your Province maps with designs from Indigenous artists across Turtle Island. And we invite you to take a look and make sure your land acknowledgement for today applies to some of the Indigenous History Month that's ongoing. So our focus in today's agenda for CAAM is creating that consistent and recurring space to hold some of the challenges and regulatory updates from both ourselves as the industry voice and our national authorities on road to operations in Canada. We'll be providing a quick overview of the CAAM 2.0 and our pathway towards operationalization before we then transition to our conversation with Transport Canada and Adil Chaudhry, who will be giving that certification pathway and update, followed by some question and answers. Lastly, we'll conclude the event with Alan Chapman from NAV Canada, providing the insight on the remote traffic management trials and some of the ConOps visions produced by the NAV Canada team. We'll ask for today's audience engagement. We invite attendees to submit their questions via the question and answer function that's available here in the Zoom webinar, which will allow our CAAM team members to respond and follow up offline if we don't have enough time to answer all the Q&As showed in today's discussion. So we'll bring it back up to the top again and just focus on what is this advanced air mobility language. So in our updated 5-year strategy, we've expanded our operating model to be more in line with that evolving definition of advanced air mobility. Specifically for us at CAAM, advanced air mobility is that evolution of our air transportation system enabled by 3 main pillars. Number 1, the new propulsion systems. Think of that electric and hydrogen opportunities. Number 2, the new aircraft architecture. And number 3, the new operating missions, all culminating together to allow people, goods, and services to move within our urban and regional areas more safely. And this, to give some visuals, allows us to develop out our evolving aviation ecosystem that spans a variety of different aircraft architectures, a variety of different air propulsion systems, and of course, varying levels of autonomy. We begin with the RPAS development on the remotely piloted aircraft systems. Shown here is one of the examples from Indra Robotics on their Wayfinder, which started flying in around that 2016 timeframe. Expanding to some of the retrofits, we then look to the incredible work going on at the regional development with the Harbour Air's eVTOL program having its first flight in that 2019 side. And then as we look to this new developing space on the aviation training side for the sector of our future pilots and coming to the industry, we look to some of the examples with having Sealand Flight's Pipistrel VLOS Electro, which had its first commercial flight in June of 2024 here in Canada. This is one of the examples in conjunction with the Waterloo Institute for Sustainable Aeronautics on some of the progression of this aviation training sector as well. Then, as we see some of the developments coming in the electric vertical takeoff and landing space, we looked at the Beta ALIA 250 on their progress on the eVTOL program, which is expected to be certified and flying in certain parts of the world by that 2028 timeframe. And then as we bring in some of the autonomy factor, we look at what the electric vertical takeoff and landing space has for the Wisk Gen 6 aircraft, which has that expected certified operation timeframe in the 2030 plus space, but bringing in different levels of autonomy as well as the electric propulsion as well. And then lastly, our ability to pull on new energy systems like the hydrogen aviation space for applications with the Airbus Zero-E projects. And this is just that longevity pathway that we're looking at for ensuring that the commercial aviation space is identified and within the scope of the work at Canadian Advanced Air Mobility as well. So this is our overall evolving aviation ecosystem, and the important piece is that no singular aircraft will serve all of our mission and operating cases within Canada, and it's within our AAM umbrella that we ensure the Canadian ecosystem is prepared, engaged, and developing out our operational pathways to include these new aircraft into their space and operations as well. And this is what brings us to our CAAM mission. At CAAM, our vision and purpose has become only more clear with the defined growth of advanced air mobility globally. Simply put, at CAAM, we exist to assemble and build the Canadian AAM ecosystem well en route to operations. And for us, we put a lot of emphasis on this well component, bringing in 4 key aspects. For us, well means expediting Canada's transition to zero-emission aviation in line with that ICAO 2050 goal, bringing that globally unique triforce of our national authorities of Transport Canada, NAV Canada, and the industry voice at CAAM together, having that co-founding partnership with the National Research Council of Canada, and then critically, catalyzing that diverse, equitable, and inclusive workforce that will be required for the future of advanced air mobility operations. Now, we know none of this can be done in silo. This is where CAAM is put in conjunction with our 200+ member industry organizations, the incredible work with our aerospace ecosystem as well, in building that development globally, represented from our international, national, and regional municipal partners, spanning the variety of ecosystem players from advocacy, skills development, research and innovation, government, and of course, our diversity, equity, and inclusion partners as well. Each organization has a role to play in the advanced air mobility future, and CAAM has been working to stitch together how those roles can be complemented, leveraging the existing pieces in commercial aviation en route to the advanced air mobility future as well. And this has been our pathway. Our first 5 years at CAAM were spent on building that education and awareness throughout Canada. And now at the start of 2024, we're transitioning to this operationalization plan. We are focused on the tangibility of bringing both the industry together as well as our government authorities, showcasing how these operations can play across the Canadian ecosystem. So for some of the updates specific on that tangibility, since we gathered at our last town hall 3 months ago, we've put together a quick simplified list, but please reach out to us and our team if there more in-depth knowledge is required. Some of the updates that we wanted to share was starting off on the ICAO AAM Symposium hosted in Montreal this September time. We're privileged to say that the Wisk Gen 6 aircraft is coming to Canada for its first time ever. The full-scale aircraft will be in Montreal on display at the ICAO AAM conference. And this will be that combination of CAAM's partnership with the United Nations and the International Civil Aviation Organization, or ICAO, on welcoming the world to Canada for their inaugural Advanced Air Mobility Symposium. We're also lucky to have Air Canada, one of our board members, as the official airline sponsor. So the CAAM team will put the link for the ICAO AAM event in our chat here for anyone that hasn't registered yet, but we want to make sure we bring our conversations face-to-face in Montreal this September time. Similarly, one of our main announcements came from our partners with Aero Montréal and Jared Morley with the launch of Airspace Aero. And this is a first in Canada for bringing over $415 million of planned investments coming from a combination of the province of Quebec, Boeing, and critically some of our other aerospace majors, solidifying around this innovation zone with advanced air mobility, decarbonization, and autonomy as a key aspect. What we want to bring awareness to is the $95 million from Boeing that is going specifically to the expansion and engagement of the Wisk eVTOL development in Quebec, leading some of the work here in Canada as well. The 3 zones that will be represented within the Airspace Aero is focusing on the Longueuil hub, which will have a decarbonization component to it, the Mirabel hub, which will be more of the autonomy piece, and then lastly, the Montréal Saint Laurent hub, which will bring both the decarbonization and autonomy aspects together. Next, we look to Canada's first ever commercial electric flight done by Sealand Aero in the Pipistrel VLOS Electro. This was flown on June 14th of this year, and this camp complements a lot of the growing initiatives in that electric aviation trainer space in combination with the Waterloo Institute of Sustainable Aeronautics as well. So some of those momentum pieces in helping to build out the future pilot pipeline, as well as some of the tangible operations. And lastly, we're excited to share that CAAM has been selected to lead our Canadian delegation for the Air Taxi World Congress event being hosted in Dubai from October 7th to 10th this year. So we have funding available for our organizations to attend up to 50% reimbursement on their travel and attendance over there. Our CAAM team will provide the link to in the chat for any registration of those Canadian organizations. And this will be an opportunity to come under both the CAAM and Canada umbrella for our delegation to have a representation at the Air Taxi World Congress event this year in Dubai. So feel free to sign up on that side, and we'll make sure that we can have a strong Canadian presence over in Dubai later this year. And this is where we get a transition into our key conversation for today. So our quarterly town hall is going to start off with Adil Chaudhry giving some of the updates on the advanced air mobility, propulsion, and certification pathways. And then we'll continue with Alan Chapman from NAV Canada on the RPAS Traffic Management. So at that point in time, Adil, I'll welcome you up to the stage. thank you so much for being with our ecosystem here today, and we're excited to hear some of the updates coming from your side. Adil, everything is up to you.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Jack. Can you guys hear me okay?
You're good on that side, Adil.
Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. There we go. All right, all good. Okay, well, thank you for having me, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to meet JR again. Been involved in the AAM space just for the last couple of months and had a chance to meet JR on several occasions and commend the great work that you're doing, to promote AAM in Canada, and look forward to working with you a lot in the future. So I'm going to speak a little bit today about Transport Canada's role in the certification of advanced air mobility and eVTOL aircraft. I've kind of presented a similar presentation in a few events recently at the eVTOL Insights Conference and at the Vertical Flight Society. So some of you may already be familiar with this material. But I'd also like to go into a little bit of background of Transport Canada, kind of how we're organized and what our purpose is. So here's my little agenda for today. Speaking about the structure of Transport Canada, what we do as far as national aircraft certification goes, and what really the regulatory framework is behind the certification process. Talk a little bit about the international arrangements that we have and how that supports certification validation. Talk about critical steps towards certifying these new technologies and how momentum is building. So I hope that this will cover, the curiosity of a lot of you folks, but if you have more questions, feel free to, put them in the chat or reach out to me, and be happy to try to answer them. So as JR mentioned, my name is Adil Chaudhry. I'm a Senior Project Certification Manager with Transport Canada. I'm from Montreal originally. I did my undergrad at Concordia, master's at McGill, and I'm an engineer. By background, I've worked in R&D at Rolls-Royce, maintenance and operations at Air Canada before joining Transport Canada. Been at Transport for 10 years now. Worked in continuing airworthiness and now in certification. So I feel like I've been here a while, but only recently really got into the AAM space. And so it's been a fun couple of months, I'd say, speaking at various events and really getting to understand the ecosystem and meeting some of the new players, aside from the traditional, aircraft manufacturing companies that we're used to working with. My original portfolio includes engines and propellers and appliances, and now more recently I've added to that, electric hybrid propulsion, advanced air mobility, and airships. And my role at Transport Canada, which I will get into a little bit later, is really to coordinate between the various players who want to have an aircraft certified. So that includes applicants, people who are manufacturing the aircraft, delegates who are making findings of compliance on behalf of the minister, as well as the technical specialists that work at NAC, National Aircraft Certification, and our standards branch and foreign civil aviation authorities such as FAA, EASA, ANAC, CAAC, and many others. So that's just a bit about me and what I do. I work for Transport Canada, and we're a very big organization, probably one of the biggest departments of the government, with over 5,000 employees across the country. We don't only work in aviation. Transport Canada, unlike FAA and EASA, responsible for 4 different modes of transportation. So it includes marine, rail, and road safety. We're headquartered in Ottawa, as most government departments are, but we have regional offices throughout the country, in Vancouver, in Calgary, Edmonton, Winnipeg, Toronto, Dorval, and out east as well. So quite a presence, and that's become much more scattered since COVID. We now have employees working in different places around the country and reporting to different offices. So we're very much a dispersed organization and virtual in that sense. So here's a bit of an org chart. I won't go through all the names, but the essential thing here I wanted to draw a connection between is what I do in certification, and most of you may have heard from Jeannie Stewart-Smith, the last town hall, who's heading up the AAM integration team and kind of how that fits into things. So we all report to the minister, but a couple of layers down from that, we all report to the DG of Civil Aviation. That's Felix Meunier, who's right here. And within civil aviation, we're split up into various different directorates. So we have standards, operations, RPAS task force, and aircraft certification. So I sit here in aircraft certification under project management. As I said, we have specialists who do a lot of the work under the engineering and flight test branches, and we also have folks responsible for delegation and regional engineering. And we're feeding into the work that Jeannie is doing with the AAM integration team, and her intention, I guess, is to work across, these different directorates to make sure that we all understand what's going on, and we can satisfy the need when it comes to all aerospace operations, but specifically advanced air mobility and some of the interesting challenges that we're going to face. So I hope that helps kind of set the lay of the land, and I think you'll get a copy of this org chart if you need any further information. So our safety program is basically dictated by the Aeronautics Act, which is a parliamentary approval, asking Transport Canada and the minister to develop safety policy, regulations, and standards, as well as conduct oversight of the aviation industry. So we kind of divide our work into two. We have the regulatory framework, which is the standards and the rules, and then we have the oversight. How do we make sure that the industry is really complying with those rules? So we do obviously certifications, we do assessments, validations, inspections, and when needed, enforcement in cases of non-compliance. And the goal here, the mission of the aviation safety program, is really to maintain public confidence in the safety of certified aeronautical products. So the regulatory framework, as I said, starts with the Aeronautics Act, and that enables the Canadian aviation regulations, which we call the CARS. And through the CARS, the standards is the airworthiness manual. So that tells you how you will meet those regulations. So you may be familiar with the FAA structure. We used to call them the FARs. That's the equivalent to the CARS. But that's basically how we set the standards when it comes to certification and operations as well. We have advisory circulars then and staff instructions that really dictate the way we do our work. So who does what in the certification process? In a nutshell, this is kind of how we do oversight. So once the rules are set, and that's the standards and regulatory people that do that work to set the standards, how do we make sure that a type design that is being certified in Canada meets those regulations? So we do oversight. So the terms that you'll see here, I'll use a lot throughout the next few slides. The applicant is obviously the person who wants to certify their aircraft. So could be Boeing, could be Bombardier, could be Wisk, Lamosa, Jaunt, any of these companies who want to come and have their product certified. And they're the ones responsible for demonstrating compliance. So the applicant demonstrates, and the minister finds compliance. Now, we say minister, and that means someone acting on behalf of the minister. So that could be Transport Canada directly, or it could be a delegate. And I don't speak too much today about the delegation system, but what you should know is that people outside of Transport Canada, outside of the government, can be delegated to make findings of compliance. And we encourage that a lot. In fact, most of the major OEMs are delegated organizations, so they have the authority to make findings of compliance, and that helps to progress their certification projects. And once the delegate finds compliance, or the minister finds compliance, the minister then approves the design. And again, depending on the type of design, that could be done by the delegate, or it will be done by Transport Canada. And so in the case of a type certificate, for example, that is approved by Transport Canada. Excuse me, just some water. Okay, so digging into the process a little bit more, I won't go into this in major detail, but when it comes to domestic type certification, there are 4 phases in the process. And for the sake of advanced air mobility, most of the folks are around here, right? In the preliminary design, initial notification to TCCA, it all starts with the market need, and it has to start with regulations and standards. And that's right now in the advanced air mobility space where we're kind of I'd say playing catch up, but we're trying to make sure that we have the right regulations and standards, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. But once there's a market need and there's folks who want to apply with a design, then the minister is responsible for accepting that application and going through this process. So the first process of that is establishing the basis of certification. What are the rules that this product is going to comply with, and what are the ones that are applicable? Once we've established that basis of certification, usually through a G1 issue paper, We'll go into phase 2, agreeing on the means and methods of compliance. So that's one level lower as to, how will you actually show that demonstration to these exact rules? So that's a pretty involved phase, phase 2. And then phase 3 is the biggest phase, actually, the demonstration of compliance. So that includes flight testing, the completion of manuals, reports, analysis, all the findings of compliance are done in that phase. So typically that can take, 3 to 4 years, depending on the scope of the project. And then once the type design is certified, you're able to obviously issue a type certificate. Eventually, you'll get a manufacturing approval, and then for every aircraft, you'll get a certificate of airworthiness to go into service. And the loop comes back, when you have to make changes to the type design, you assess it through something called change product rule, and then you go through that phase again. So it's a complex process, but to lay it out simply, there's these 4 phases. And it's really a collaborative effort between the applicant and the authority, Transport Canada, as well as the delegate involved. Okay, I'd ask if there's any questions, but I think we'll save that for later. I know I'm going through a lot of information right now. It's not really easy to be talking when you can't see who the audience is, but I hope this makes sense to you. So one of the things that helps us to work internationally with our partners are international agreements, bilateral agreements with our partners. So long-standing ones that we have with FAA and EASA. You may be familiar with IPA and TIP are the acronyms, and we also have agreements with ANAC, UK, CAAC, etc. So the goal of these agreements is to make sure that if you're a Canadian manufacturer exporting your product around the world, or if a manufacturer from the US or from Europe wants to import into Canada, we don't have to do as much work. We trust what the other authorities are doing. So we're harmonized in our processes. We try to have common standards as much as possible. And a lot of the standards that we have existed before these agreements. So we're trying now to, work towards harmonizing and making sure that we're on the same page when it comes to new standards, understanding any differences that we may have. So the biggest one that we point to in Canada is our cold soak requirements. Unlike anywhere else in the world, you have to make sure that your aircraft can fly at -40 when it has to. So those are some of our unique requirements, and the other authorities understand those quite well. Recognizing competencies, so gaining trust, especially with FAA and EASA, we want them to trust the work that we're doing just as much as we trust the work that they are doing. And being able to mutually work together and trust each other when it comes to that. So in a nutshell, all that allows us to avoid bureaucracy, eliminate duplication, reduce costs, and remove barriers to enable economic movement between countries. So getting into new technologies a little bit, what are some of the critical steps towards certifying new technology? So first of all, it comes down to research and learning at all levels. Just as much as manufacturers are getting out there, designers and academia even are getting out there researching these new things. Well, unfortunately, the authority is not at the cutting edge of that. It really is the industry that is. So we're doing our best to make sure that we're doing the right research. We're learning at all levels. We're engaging wherever possible, with organizations such as NRC, the Research Council, to make sure that new technologies are being looked at, assessed, and we're able to have some knowledge at least about what's going on, so that when applicants do come to us with new and novel designs, we know at least what's going on, and that's what we're trying to do with AAM, and specifically electric propulsion. Engaging early to discuss these high-risk areas. So we're always encouraging applicants who have designs to come and engage with us, to start talking, say, hey, look, this is how I'm going to design this rotor or this wing, and it's unique. This has never been done before. What are the risks here? Is this possible? Is this certifiable? So we want to have those discussions early on, because you can't come to us with a brand new technology and expect us to certify it within a year if we've never seen it before. Establishing the basis, as I mentioned earlier, is a very critical part of the process, and particularly when it comes to these technologies where we don't have standards or rules yet. We really need to do a lot of work to establish that basis, and I'll speak a bit more about that in the following slide when it comes to advanced air mobility. As I mentioned previously, we really need to harmonize with our bilateral partners, so we are working very closely with FAA and EASA to make sure we're on the same page We understand each other's regulations, and we hope to be harmonized when it comes to that. As I mentioned earlier regarding delegation, one of the key criteria for applying or being an applicant is to ensure technical capability. And what that means is making sure that someone who is applying has the knowledge and ability to certify that design and also maintain its airworthiness in service. And so we do assess that when it comes to an application. And we encourage applicants to reach out and find delegates if they don't have delegated individuals or organizations they're working with, because that will be a key factor when it comes to prioritization, to working together, and to collaborating to make sure that we are all on the same page. We really highly encourage applicants to have seek out delegation per Airworthiness Manual 505. And lastly, prioritization. As with all organizations, we have limited resources, and as much as we'd love to, meet and talk with the hundreds of manufacturers out there who are working on AAM, we don't have the capacity to do so. We still have to deal with Bombardiers and Airbus and Boeings of the world who are producing civil, commercial aircraft flying around hundreds of passengers every day. At the end of the day, that's our priority. But we're very keen to get involved with the new technology. So if a customer comes to us with technical capability, with a viable product to market, with customer deliveries, and with an interesting use case that serves a public interest, then we are happy to engage and commit resources to that. So specific to advanced air mobility. As I mentioned, our approach has to be harmonized. We want to develop an approach where we agree with the other authorities on what we're doing. We want to also look very much at performance-based requirements and means of compliance that would be mutually acceptable to all authorities. We recognize that, with our collaboration and working with others, with the other authorities, we know that this approach will be incremental. It's kind of a crawl, walk, run. Someone once said it's best to change as little things as possible. So don't come with a brand new, fully autonomous, never before seen type of vehicle, because that's gonna be very difficult. But what we're starting with is, conventional piloted, transitional eVTOL aircraft, and we're slowly changing one thing at a time until, one day we may get to that point where we're flying around fully autonomous airliners, but we're not there yet. And we want to do all this in a balanced way. We as an authority, safety is first in mind, but we also don't want to inhibit innovation, right? We want people to get out there and innovate, create new designs, and we need to make sure that's being done in the safest way possible. So with that being said, you guys may have seen recently, if you're involved in the certification space, that the FAA published an advisory circular recently to discuss the type certification of powered lift. It includes electric engines and propeller airworthiness criteria as well. Very similar to what's already been published and what's out there for Joby and Archer, but now put into a more generic format. And so Traffic Canada is looking at that. We intend to comment on it and eventually be harmonized with the FAA. And as does EASA. So EASA updated their special condition VTOL to standardize a bit of their rules with the FAA, and they will be continuing to work together, as will we. So we don't intend to change the standards. We're not going to come up with anything unique aside from maybe cold soak requirements and stuff like that. We do intend to be harmonized with what is out there, and most of our airworthiness manual is harmonized with the FAA. So I wouldn't see us straying too far from that, although the regulatory mechanism will differ. So we don't issue special class airworthiness criteria in Canada, nor can we issue a generic special condition. So the way we go about that may change, but we expect that the standards will be the same. And so with that being said, we cannot develop regulations in a vacuum. Like I said, we need to have a project-specific certification basis. And so we're, again, looking for applicants to come to us and say, hey, look, this is our design, this is what we're doing. And then we can just start to develop specific rules for it. And in Canada, the regulations CAR 521 allows us to apply the applicable portions of existing criteria, existing regulations. So would be it AWM 523 for normal category aircraft, 527 for rotorcraft, 533 for engines. Anything that does apply to those areas can be part of the certification basis. And then on top of that, we add special conditions as required. So based on some of the research that's been done already in the US, about 50% of that basis will come from existing rules, and about 50 to 40% will be outside of those rules and require a special condition. And lastly, JR, you already touched on this quite a bit, but momentum is really building in Canada, and what you see here are actually all projects or discussions which Transport Canada is involved in. We've been approached by most, if not all, of these applicants to discuss their designs. So on the top left, you see the VLOS Electro. That engine has been certified. So it's the first electric engine to be certified or validated in Canada. And we're looking to validate that aircraft, I think, this month or next month. So really great progress there. Here you have the Horizon aircraft. We've started discussions with them as well. Safran has approached us to certify their electric engine, and that's going to be installed in Canada on the Piper Archer, which is down in the bottom left here with CAE, putting that onto an existing aircraft. We're working with Flying Whales. We've received application to validate the Flying Whales airship as well, working very closely with the EASA on that one. We've also been working with FAA and magniX to certify their engines, which will be installed on the Harbour Air seaplane, which is right here. And then we have the NRC hybrid electric testbed. Again, like I mentioned earlier, we've been collaborating with them, learning through their experiences on what's going on in that space. We've also talked to Jaunt. We are engaged with Lamosa, and obviously we're looking forward to hearing from Beta on that deal, which will be operating with Helijet in the coming years. So that's the lay of the land. There's a lot going on. We're quite busy. Aside from the conventional aircraft and engine certifications, we're very excited to be getting our feet wet in here, and we look forward to a lot more collaboration and future engagement. So with that being said, feel free to keep in touch with us. There are some links here to the Transport Canada website, just discussing aircraft certification if you have more questions or want to learn more about that, the Canadian aviation regulations. We have a generic email address for AAM certification that you can use here, or you can reach out to me personally. My email address is at the bottom. And as you may have heard last meeting, the AAM integration team, there is a website there and some contact information as well. And that is all I had. Thank you very much. If you have any questions or comments, I look forward to them.
Wonderful, Adil. Thank you for taking some time and just walking through the challenges, opportunities, but also the progress that is being made. And I think that's what's not often spoken about, is all of these different pieces coming together and showcasing how it fits into the greater picture within Transport Canada and critically with the international organizations. So we've got a couple of questions coming in live, and we'll make sure that we can touch base on them. But one of the first ones that was mentioned here, Adil, can you just give some more insight on the importance of that harmonization with some of the international partners like the FAA and EASA? Where have there been successes so far in this new developing advanced mobility space, or some of the challenges that are still out there to be solved out?
Absolutely, yeah. So as I mentioned, harmonization is key, especially because, as much as we want to be at the forefront of this, we recognize the fact that there are American and European applicants who are further ahead when it comes to the certification process. And so we really need to learn from the experience of our colleagues, FAA and EASA. And so even in some cases, we've approached them about discussing and learning about applicants who haven't necessarily applied in Canada yet. But we want to really know about what they're doing and really what rules they're using to certify these things, because at the high level, yes, we can say we're harmonized, but there will be differences in interpretation when it comes to certain specific rules and stuff like that. So we want to make sure that we're on the same page. And at that level, our experts are always talking. They're world-renowned experts. They're involved in all these different working groups, ASTM and SAE and all these kind of things. So they're very much engaged with each other. They know what's going on, and I think they're on the same page when it comes to this.
Yeah, and that's to highlight exactly what you're saying there, Adil, too, on Jeannie Stewart-Smith's involvement on the ICAO AM integration team, having that international focus as well on saying how is Canada ensuring that our alignment is there on the harmonized aspect globally and how that can play out into our operation pieces across the country. There's some questions coming in more on the light sport aircraft side. So knowing some of the success that Sealand and WISE, Waterloo Institute for Sustainable Aeronautics have had, can you give us just some insight on how you see that progressing, kind of the short-term opportunities for additional aircraft coming in that light sport area?
Absolutely. I'll be honest, I'm not an expert when it comes to light sport or even Gen Av, and this is where we're trying to, draw a line when it comes to the traditional GA or even rotorcraft operations and the AAM. So the pipistrel really is it's being certified as an LSA, through I believe Part 22. I don't know what more I can say to that really. It's an EASA certification. We are validating it, not extremely in depth because our validations are always risk-based. So when it comes to a light sport aircraft, for a trainer flying, a few people here and there, it's not a huge risk to the public. So we're doing our best to obviously validate the work EASA has done, but we trust them as well. But yeah, this is, from my understanding, this is a pilot project about, using LSAs for training and seems like it's going well. And if it will continue to go well, then there's probably more opportunities to do that as well.
Excellent. Thanks for the insight there. And kind of our next question going out here is, we've seen some of those projects you had on the slide there that Transport Canada has been engaged with. Through the initial kind of phase of their Adil, what can you put the ask out to the ecosystem is the best way to work with Transport Canada, with you and your team? What would that ask be to the group?
So I would say, know your certification basis and your rules. And that's hard to say when it comes to these new tech, because we always get the question, oh, well, what are your rules going to be? Well, we can't say what the rules are until we get an application. But what we're seeing now is applicants coming to us because they see what's out there with FAA and EASA. They're coming to us with a proposal, at least. They're coming, not empty-handed. They have, as I mentioned, they have technical capability. They have delegates under contract, and they have a plan. And a lot of those companies I mentioned, you saw on the slide, a few of them were Canadian, but many of them are not. And so they already have an established process and they're working with their authorities. So we're looking at that too as a learning opportunity. How is FAA working with, maybe Beta, for example? How is EASA going to be working with flying whales? So we're taking that as well as a learning point. But I would say, yeah, definitely having technical capability and a plan for certification before coming to us would really help.
There you go. So that's the direct call to the ecosystem and some of those pieces required to help expedite that process, and of course have that engaging piece.
Mm-hmm.
And as we look forward, we're sitting here Q2 of 2024, some aggressive timelines being put out there by some of the OEMs. What are the challenges that you are seeing from your work, Adil, in the next, let's say, 12 to 24 months that are going to be those big hurdles that we need to overcome on route to that operationalization piece?
I think it definitely comes to the standards. Like I said, we're working towards being harmonized, but we haven't really gone through the process of making those rules law in Canada. So we'll have to issue special conditions. We'll have to figure out how that's all going to work. And in some of these areas, it's something we've never done before when it comes to battery systems and integrating them with propulsion systems, integrating those into the aircraft. Really unique applications that we don't necessarily know how we're going to deal with. And a good example of that is H55, which I think I forgot to mention. We were working with them as well. They've certified a storage system with a propulsion unit in one package and certified that with the EASA. Well, we don't know if we're able to do that. We're going to try our best, but we may need to say, okay, your battery system is part of the aircraft, as traditionally a fuel system would be, and your propulsion system is separate. So really trying to address those nuances when it comes down to looking at the application and establishing the certification basis.
Yeah, and just to stress also the importance of that relationship with the National Research Council and NAV Canada as well, for bringing both the research and development side for these new unknown areas and to dive into there, and similarly on the aerospace aspect. And I know we have a couple of questions coming on the airspace side. We will save those for the experts of Alan and team from NAV Canada. But I think that's what I wanted to leave off on here, Adil, is for the ecosystem to just realize those different forces moving to support the development from their areas of expertise, yourself on the certification propulsion side, but how that plays into the larger Transport Canada system, and then similarly complements the other challenges being pushed from NAV and the National Research Council as well. Excellent. So with that, Adil, on behalf of the entire ecosystem, thank you for giving us some of the insight today. We will be making sure that the information is shared out to the ecosystem at the conclusion of today's conversation. So take a look for the summary email. And Adil, thank you so much again for the time. And we look forward to the conversation with you and the Transport Canada team in the near future.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Aaron. I see some of the questions on the side. I'll try to type the answers as we go, but appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I'm happy to answer any more questions you may have, and look forward to future presentations.
Wonderful. And as we get prepared to welcome Alan Chapman up on the stage, we will make sure that those questions are recorded so that we have a chance to follow up offline. So thank you again for the audience for giving some of those insights there. We're now going to take us into the second part of the conversation for the town hall, and we're going to welcome up Alan Chapman, the Director of RPAS Traffic Management at NAV Canada. Alan, thank you so much for being here and being our complimentary piece on what we know is an additional topic that's being asked about and focused on, and just an additional opportunity to share the ongoing good work and some of that vision that NAV Canada has been putting towards our future of the remote traffic management systems. So welcome. We'll pass on the platform to yourself, Alan, and grateful for your presence here today.
Great, thanks, Sharon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to everybody out there around some of the work that's underway right now. I will take care of the screen sharing part of this in a second. Here we go. Okay.
Up on that side, Alan.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sharon. Yeah, that was a great presentation, Adil. Thank you very much for that. I certainly appreciated that and picked up a few things. And I think it's a great sequence that you've lined up today, JR, as we look at this. So I'm Alan Chapman. I'm the Director for RPAS and RPAS Traffic Management inside NAV Canada. That expands not just to RPAS, but also into AAM and some of the new forms of aircraft and propulsion that we're looking at as well. For those of you who may be unfamiliar, NAV Canada is the air navigation service provider. We're responsible for planning and managing the airspace in civilian airspace in Canada. And my unit, the RPAS unit, is responsible for the safe integration of RPAS within that airspace. So that's what I'll be talking today about. Specifically today, I've been asked to focus on RPAS, small RPAS, and kind of the ConOps that we put out recently, and also about the RTM trials that are underway. That'll be my focus. It's really one of four areas that we focus on in NAV Canada for the development of this space. So we have small RPAS flying at low level. We have RPAS that are maybe not where they're supposed to be, so dealing with incursion threats, etc. Large RPAS, so how we integrate IFR integrated aircraft and RPAS into the overall space. And finally, the other areas of AAM, new aircraft, new propulsion systems, etc. And I'm on a number of working groups internationally supporting some of that work and understanding the needs that industry has connected with these new platforms in how we offer service moving forward. So I'm going to start today, and as I said, the focus is going to be on small RPAS and where we're going with this vision. I am going to be talking about three things today. So first of all, very quick overview of where we are today. Secondly, I'm going to look at the future from the ConOps perspective and kind of the vision for RTM as we move forward. And third, I'm going to finish off by talking a little bit about the trials that have been underway and that we are moving into the second phase of. So I'll be sharing that information with you all. So to start, where are we today? We have a service out through a product called NAV Drone, which is there to deal with the current regulations and the current requests for small RPAS integrating into the airspace. That system's been around for a few years now. We've had over 130,000 requests for access to controlled airspace, and we approve a large percentage of those automatically in the way that we operate. The system covers 137 control zones, and right now we've got more than 51,000 users of the system with 8,000 advanced pilots. And of course, the advanced pilots are the people who can request access to controlled airspace. So when we look at that space today, it's kind of the simplest case in many ways. So we're looking at small drones flying visual line of sight. We're looking at micro drones in the airspace and small RPAS, basic and advanced operators. So that's kind of the picture we see. As I said, NAV drone was launched a few years ago, 2019, the regulations came out. 2020, we put a beta out of NAV drone, and then in 2021, it went live. And we've kept updating it and kept releasing it throughout the years. It continues to have an active roadmap of development that goes on for a number of years forward from here. And we're constantly listening to industry, reviewing the needs of pilots, and adapting the software as we move forward. And of course, adapting the software as new regulations come about. And I'll talk about some of those in a second. So let's shift here from sort of the kind of where we are today with small RPAS and that activity into the future, and kind of how we transition into VLOS in the most complex airspace. So today we're at visual line of sight, small RPAS, operating Class G and controlled airspace, and NAV Canada being included in that controlled airspace permission process. As we move forward, we know that there's through Canada Gazette 1, a set of regulatory changes being proposed. The first set of those is really extending visual line of sight. We know that the weight limit's going to be increased. It's going to extend to sheltered operations, etc. And then we start to step into beyond visual line of sight with low risk VLOS as we move forward through those proposals. There are a number of mitigations included in the regulations, but it isn't seen that you will need the complexity of a full RTM system to fly in a large percentage of Canadian geography. A large percentage of the geography is low risk from both the ground and an air risk perspective. So the proposals kind of cover that capability for you to deal with and manage those mitigations directly. Where this gets complex and where this gets has an increased need of service is when you moved into controlled airspace, when you move above heavily populated areas, and being able to mitigate those risks appropriately as we move forward. So that's kind of where the continuum that we're on. I'm certainly looking forward to those low risk VLOS because I think that answers one of the questions I have for industry, which is how, we hear a lot of interest in operations and things, but how much of this is going to kind of get going? How much of this, when you've got the capability to do low risk VLOS, how much will this pick up? How many use cases will there be for industry? So I think that's going to be an exciting time for us. But as we move into that complex area, we published, and this isn't just the work of NAV Canada, this is NAV Canada working with Transport Canada, industry and other bodies, to look at a concept of operations for how we will work in these more complex spaces. And so I'm going to give you a vision of that and kind of view of that as we move forward. So as I said, worked with close collaboration with Transport Canada. So this isn't just the work of NAV that I'm presenting here. All the work that we've done in the past on this thread around trials, around stakeholder conferences, all the listening and the feedback that we've got has really been the basis for the development of this ConOps. We've also taken feed from all of the international groups and work that's been done, lots of projects, lots of research. So we've taken as much of that as we can and built it into this. And the ConOps is out there really to stimulate conversation and discussion. We are building against it now. We're starting to kind of put the blocks in place. But we also expect this to evolve. We expect the ConOps to evolve and the systems to evolve as we move forward. So this first scope of the ConOps, it's for, still for very low level. It's for visual line of sight and beyond visual line of sight, for operations outside and within populated areas, and within controlled airspace, but still having segregation within controlled airspace to manage that and give the flexibility and the frequency of operations that may be required in controlled airspace, and having an area of that delegated down to the system. I'll talk more about that at the end of the vision. The ConOps goes into really the types of RPAS operations that are going to be supported in fairly broad terms. It talks about the sort of regulations that may be required and how we're going to operate those, operate with those in the future. It talks about the airspace design and the other supporting infrastructure and capabilities that are going to be needed. One big shift that we're looking at doing in Canada as we move forward is really going from just purely a centralized service model, which is what we have today in many ways, with NAV Canada providing all the service that's required, to really opening the door to third-party service providers being the front end for operators and pilots. So today, if you want to access controlled airspace, you use NAV Drone. It's the only tool you can use to do that. In the future, we'd like to open that aperture so that other providers of service can actually be the front end for pilots and operators. We think there's a good benefit there for industry, because that will allow some of those providers to be specialists in certain areas, add a lot more value than the basic sort of flight permission and some of the services which we'll talk about in a moment. So that whole concept of RTM service providers is going to be really important, and the collaboration, the ecosystem that will build up in this space. What we will do to support all of that is we'll create a set of centralized services that those third parties can interface with. That gives us that central view, that one view of the truth, so we understand exactly what's happening, and we can provide central services which will again allow us to live up to our mandate of keeping the airspace safe for all users. And the caveat at the bottom there just says, this is our intent, this is what we see as we move forward. But we're going to be learning, right? We're going to be learning about the scale that's required from industry, about the kind of technologies that are going to be available in the future, and how we bring all of that together, into a picture, and that's going to adapt and change, I'm sure, as we move forward. So that's definitely a learning process as we move forward. I won't spend too much time on this diagram, but what it's giving you in picture format is kind of what I just spoke about in terms of the blue box. The large blue box on the chart is the NAV Canada Central Service Provision. We call it rFIMS, RPAS Flight Information Management System. And that sort of sits at the core of the system and supports operators and pilots through these interfaces from the RTM service providers. It relies on Transport Canada's infrastructure as well, so registrations and other activities that they will capture, and we'll feed those into rFIMS so we can do validation of flights and drones, etc. And this model relies on the RTM service providers to be there. You'll notice there is a blue box at the back of that stack of green boxes. The number of green boxes represents a number of service providers we're expecting. But the blue box represents the fact that NAV Canada will also have an initial RTM service provider so that we can complete the story, and particularly where there are sensitive users or users with sensitive information, such as government users, first responders, etc., then they will be able to use a sort of a service that we provide. We also know this space will have to allow for supplemental data providers. So there's more data than we typically provide today to aviation. So we want to make sure there's a space for that. That data either coming into NAV Canada from a central provision and dissemination perspective, or going straight out to the RTM service providers. And then obviously space on the model for the other uses that are required for command and control, network identification or remote ID, and detect and avoid capabilities as well. So all of those also being required either through the service providers or directly to RPAS operators. So this diagram intends to just give you a picture kind of how we see that ecosystem coming together from an architecture perspective. I have a number of slides to kind of step through around just some of the services that we would expect the system overall to provide. And I'm going to start with those services that are in the big blue box for the Flight Information Management System, rFIMS. I'll walk through some of those to give you an indication of the kind of things that it will do. By the way, as I said, this information was released in a concept of operations document. If you want to look at that, you can go to the navcanada.ca website, look at our blog, it's posted there, or just do a search on RTM ConOps for Canada, and I'm sure it will be one of the top documents on that list. So rFIMS capabilities. So before flight, we'll look to validate the flight plan. So the RSPs will submit a flight plan. They'll have already done some validation. We'll talk about that a bit later. But we'll make sure that that's valid against any additional constraints that we may have in the system. And remember, there's occasionally sensitive information which doesn't get shared out. So validation against that. And ultimately, a departure authorization, particularly in controlled airspace and in sensitive areas, to make sure that there is no issues prior to the actual launch. rFIMS will do weather distribution for the aviation weather that we provide today. And we're also looking at this area of special flight operating certificates and how we support that. We know that as we get going with this, some of the work will not have regulations fully around it. We know that's a long process to get regulations, but we know that there is a demand for these kind of sooner than that, and they will be conducted under special flight operating certificates. So how can rFIMS help in that area of special flight operating certificates? One of the other key elements inside this next generation, really, and that differentiates from what we do today. Today in NAV Drone, we have flight plans. We don't know where those aircraft actually are. We have no visibility of that. As we move forward and we look at more complex airspace and beyond visual line of sight, we're going to need to know where all the flight objects are. Of course, we know about traditional aviation controlled airspace. We need to know the RPAS side of that picture. And so position and tracking is a really important topic for us to be able to collate all that data and then be able to act on it, and act on it through things like conformance monitoring, act on it through things like dynamic conflict detection, so we can see if aircraft are going to come into proximity and breach some sort of safe separation. And even in the future, the possibility of dynamic rerouting. So if a conflict is detected or there's some other issue, advising the RTM service provider and onto the pilot of a possible reroute around those problems. Emergency response, allowing for off-nominal situations, and then message distribution, some way for the system to be able to communicate and collaborate with several actors in the system. Of course, there's management capabilities required as well. So things like airspace management. So when I talked about in controlled airspace, we'd have segregated airspace, a way to enable that, to switch that on, make it go hot, and a way to take that down as well when required. So also emergency areas that may be restricted for emergency operations, etc. All these airspace management capabilities are required. Also look at capacity management. So I think of this very much as a sort of early way to address capacity issues before we get into more complex ways of doing strategic deconfliction and even dynamic deconfliction, but just managing how many flight objects, aircraft are in a particular area at a particular time. And then finally, reporting, important part of any of these solutions. So we understand what's happened historically. We can look back at what's actually happening and understand situations that occur. So that's really, a very quick view of some of the capabilities that we see sort of from a vision perspective inside of rFIMS, that core capability. We'll move on now to some of the capabilities that we expect an RTM service provider to provide, the sort of safety services. And we expect RTM service providers in industry to build onto this, right? There's going to be many more services that they will provide. There may be specialist services like, precision agriculture, etc. But what we're looking at here are the core services from a safety management perspective that we expect. So like today, for sort of basic operations low risk, we expect flight planning, be able to submit the flight plans, be able to get departure requests through that, allowing the pilot to do that through to the system. Allowing the pilots to see a view of geo-awareness and to build up situational awareness of what's happening in the area that they want to flight, including all those things, terrain, obstacles, etc. And and again, some reporting capabilities for those basic operations. When you move to advanced, medium, and high risk ops, we're talking about this is where the network ID comes in, or the remote identification, so that the location of drones can be shared. Go through the RSP into the central system. Emergency declarations become more critical in this area. Once you start sharing position and remote ID, you've got the capability of sharing traffic information, so you can see what else is around you from a safety perspective. And then the pieces we talked about, rFIMS providing things like conflict resolution, we'd expect the RTM service provider to do that capability as well, so locally for their pilots. And message forwarding, so any messages that rFIMS sends should come through to the pilots and vice versa, coming back to the central services. Again, this idea of SFOCs is some way that we can capture the data from SFOCs to make validation of the flight plans or permissions, etc., easier to do through the process. So it's an area we're considering. And then the RSPs may have other optional capabilities here. Geofencing, certainly in critical operations, say you're near an airport, we ask for geofencing today. So how can the RTM service provider support that? Communication services we talked about as well, the C2 link, making sure people have got coverage in various areas of the country where we have different levels of infrastructure and the challenges around that. And finally, supplementary weather service or supplemental weather service. So where we provide a sort of central feed of aviation data today, what additional information is required for RPAS pilots, and how can we get that information through to those pilots, from additional service providers. Last slide of the ConOps. This talks about the airspace definitions. So what we have today, in terms of just the general airspace that people can fly operations in. So they can fly visual line of sight operations in uncontrolled and controlled, and low risk beyond visual line of sight. But then as you move into the more complex areas, the high risk areas, we'll be looking at overlaying the existing classification system with these additional sort of airspace volumes, and that is based on how each of these operate. Will be based on the kind of infrastructure from a CNS perspective that we have or that will be implemented in those areas. So the first one is segregated, so in controlled airspace, where we have visibility through our existing CNS infrastructure, segregating an area so that it would become the air traffic controller's job to keep traditional aviation separated from that volume, and the volume gets to operate from a system perspective. Cooperative says that this could be a volume where aircraft have some form of transponder, they're collaborative and cooperative within that infrastructure, so that they can be seen, and you don't enter that volume unless you have some way of cooperating with the airspace awareness picture. Then finally, non-cooperative, where there may be types of detect and avoid, types of radar, etc., that are tracking traditional aviation in that local area, and supporting the RPAS flights and ensuring, again, conflict management within that local area. And finally, restricted. So we all know that there are areas where RPAS are not allowed. So the final overlay actually could also go over any of the new volumes as well as existing classifications, and basically says, there are areas where RPAS are not restricted unless you are part of the authority for that area. That includes everything from sensitive areas, so critical infrastructure, etc. So we'll expect to see those as well an advance of kind of where we are today on our ability to restrict RPAS. So that's a view of the ConOps. Hopefully that was useful to give you some idea of the types of service that we're looking at. Again, I have to stress, we're trying to be pragmatic and realistic about this. So delivering these services in places where they're required, where there's a volume and scale requirement, where there is complexity. We're not suggesting that, you know, all of this infrastructure is required Canada-wide, by no means. And that's why we think things like the low-risk VLOS proposal, you know, is a really powerful proposal from TC to enable lots of the airspace and kind of get going in this area. So I'll move on quickly to talk about the trials program that's been underway supporting this. So we have a group called the RTM Advisory Council, and that allows us to work with industry through various working groups to get feedback on the future, things that industry feels are important. You know, we share ideas both ways with that group. One of the sub-working groups within that is the Trials Executive Steering Committee. And that really is a combination of NAV Canada, Transport Canada, the NRC, industry representative to look at how we structure our trials program, who we select to work on the trials program, etc. These are not paid trials, unlike some countries. If you're in Europea, so if you're in the European Union or, you know, other areas that may be have highly funded programs. This is industry really in Canada coming to the table and saying, we believe this is important. We want to help you unlock this. We want to help learn through this process. And we really want to have, you know, the top tier of NAV Canada and Transport Canada support in that learning process. And that's really what the trials program was constructed for. So we've concluded our round one of phase one of the trials program. You know, we very much opened that up back in 2020 to say, come and tell us about what's possible in this space. You know, teach us, educate us, and so we had a couple of great trial participants who took us through that first kind of round, and we learned a lot from those bodies. We've now just concluded our call and selection of phase two. So we're moving from purely rural into more kind of urban areas where things are getting a little bit more complex. So we're just at the stage now of kind of having completed that selection. The communication, the kickoff around that will be coming in the future months. So look out for some more information around this. No more details on that to share today in terms of who's been selected, etc. But you can expect that, as I say, in the coming months, we'll move forward. And really, this trials phase two is closely tied to the ConOps. So the request is, you know, what are the services that we can prove out through this phase two to really help us, you know, prove the point, make sure that we're heading in the right direction, that there's industry support for this, you know, and get the feedback where we're not, where we have to pivot or change direction. We want to learn that early. So hence the round of trials to help educate the whole system, educate us, Transport Canada, NAV Canada, etc., on the possibilities here and what's really going to work. So that's all from me, Jan.
Alan, wonderful. Thank you for giving us the overview, of course, the vision and the ConOps side, and then that tangible piece coming out of the trial side. We've just been going through all the questions. I know we have quite a lot here, so I'm going to try and summarize some of them, Alan, to give us some of the insight. But on a high level, what we're seeing a lot of just from the ecosystem here, can you give us some insight between where Canada is differing from the work going on globally? Talk about what we see from CANSO's kind of vision on the international side. Are there specific aspects that the ecosystem needs to be aware of for operating in Canada, both today and where that vision is projecting as well?
That's a great question. I think it's fair to say that globally, everyone is trying to get to this vision of beyond visual line of sight, and trying to understand how to safely integrate these aircraft with various challenges, right? And so that's probably a good starting point to say, well, what's different in Canada? And there's a few things that are. So one is, you know, we are a large geography, and a lot of our infrastructure is centered around our population areas, but we don't have coverage everywhere. If you live in, say, Belgium, for example, you can probably pick up an LTE or a 5G signal anywhere in the country. Not the same in Canada, clearly, and we all know that. So there are some significant differences just around, our country, the way we're structured, the availability of communications, the weather that we face here is different. And we also have a different setup in terms of, the role of NAV Canada. NAV Canada is mandated as an organization to manage, plan and manage all of civilian airspace for all service within that. So that's a very clear mandate that says whatever we do here, even when we're opening this up to third parties, NAV Canada still has a role to play to assure safety in the airspace. So I think there's some important differences sort of sitting behind the work that we're doing, between the country, the structure, and the way that the organizations come together today. Everywhere, or largely, I oversimplified to say everywhere, but a lot of places are looking at an ecosystem solution. So accepting that this has to be both industry and centralized service to some extent. What's slightly different in Canada is we're not the only country doing this, but we are looking at a slightly kind of heavier build on rFIMS in terms of its centralized service. And again, that relates to a lot of the circumstances that we find ourselves in Canada. So that's one aspect of it. I think one of the other, and I mentioned this already, but one of the other great differences is this low-risk VLOS concept. I'm really hoping that industries see that as an opportunity to advance, to try, to get these use cases operating, maybe to start serving underserved populations, in better, more creative ways. I think there's a lot of scope there for seeing how, given the volume of airspace we have in Canada, given the size of the geography, just how much we can prove out and really get ahead through some of those things. And quite honestly, one of the other differences in Canada is the great relationships we have here, between industry, between Transport Canada government, and between NAV Canada. This is absolutely all the stakeholders just coming together in a very Canadian pragmatic way to say, what do we need to do to make this work? And some of it's not as fast as we'd like it to be for any of us. There's process to go through here. But there is a great relationship and foundation underpinning that everybody's trying to do the right thing and kind of move this forward in the right way.
And just to build upon that on the ecosystem side, we see a lot of the insight and the questions coming there as well, Alan. You spoke about the data and the importance of this the flight information management system from the RPAS side. Walk us through how the vision is also looking at that prioritization of different use cases, knowing that emergency healthcare, organ delivery, emergency response, how does that prioritize within this new form of data within the centralized system?
That's a great question, actually. When I look at some of the other models that are being employed, I think it's harder for them to actually be able to assign priority. NAV Canada is very familiar with the concept of priority in the airspace today. If we have a medevac flight, today, it gets priority over traditional aviation. So we're used to, a ranking, and a ranking that, is ethically sensible. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
We'll be applying those same principles, as we move forward into RPAS. Maybe not from day one, because from day one, we'll be getting things up and running, and again, the number of flights will be kind of restricted. So, as we start some of this activity, but as we need to, we will bring in the same kind of ethical approaches to prioritization that recognize the needs of first responders, of medical deliveries, etc. As we move through this, there'll be more challenges along the way, of course. Identifying those people correctly, and as we go through the process, lots of challenges around how we do that. But conceptually, we'll be doing the same as we do today from an aviation perspective.
And you highlighted really well in the importance of the design of the phase 2 trials, how that's going to play into some of these developments. So I think the ecosystem is going to be excited to see those results as that timeline pans out through 2024 and 2025, how it's going to bring some of those tangibility pieces to the forefront as well. So just wanted to stress that for the ecosystem. Now, one of the other big questions is all of the work going on in the here and now with our RPAS sector. Where does the vision expand into those larger AAM aircraft as well?
Yeah, so we talked about, I mentioned at the top of this that we've got a number of areas we're focused on. What we see today with the shift in traditional aviation is to the new propulsion, etc. And so a lot of that absolutely is Adil's work around certification, and we expect to see the results of that. What we have to do at that level is then understand what's different about those aircraft. How do we need to adapt our service provision for that? So, if we're taking into account electric propulsion, maybe some of the ways we operate today don't quite work. From asking somebody to hold and hover, so we'll have to bring those in quicker, etc. So there's considerations there for us as we move forward that we're again looking to industry to help educate us on what they require. As you move then through the generations of AAM and you move to remotely piloted aircraft as well, like the Boeing Wisk, kind of that's where they're going. Then what you start to see is that all the learning that we're going to do today in small, low-level RPAS, the systems that we provide, etc., the trials that we go through and the real operations are going to really help us understand what that's going to look like as we kind of get to that future vision. Is it going to be some of the strategic advances that NAV Canada is making in things like trajectory-based operations, TBO, that's going to support? Is it going to be some of the RPAS learnings and capabilities that will support? All of these things are sort of going to have to correlate and come together in the future. We kind of look at them separately today. I talk about segregated airspace to get going with these things. But ultimately, we want to make this as integrated as we possibly can in the future and give airspace users as much freedom as possible. One of the big considerations, of course, is volume. How do we scale up? If we're looking at eVTOL flights, which are making much more frequent transits, how do we, as the ANSP, allow that to occur? And again, we've got systems and pieces that are in place today and are being developed. Which of those are going to make the biggest impact for this area? And again, we have to learn and understand and listen to industry and really get a sense of the volumes, the scale, the capabilities of the aircraft, and we're actively looking at that today through both international working groups and also kind of local forums as well, and the support with people like the Canadian CAAM as well to assist us.
And I just wanted to make sure that's one of the key asks going out to the ecosystem is we've posted the RTM vision concept of operations document in the chat here. It will be included in the summary email as well. If you haven't taken a chance to go through that yet, this is a great opportunity to engage in some of these initial documentation that Alan and the NAV have completed and create some of that future conversation as well for engagement. So just another important piece to put out there for an ask to the ecosystem. So with that, Alan, thank you for taking the time for giving us some of the insight. We know this is a continuing conversation, but the importance of these updates, the trials, and of course, some of the vision as it plays out, important for our ecosystem to hear and to have that platform. So on behalf of all of us, thanks for taking the time today, Alan.
Yeah, thanks to you for the forum and for everybody listening in. Appreciate it. And yeah, happy to take extra questions later as well.
That's it. And as we look at all the questions still coming in, we'll make sure we provide a summary in the email going out momentarily after the event's complete. But these are some of the pieces that we wanted to continue to build on. So Adil and Alan, thank you for giving some of the insight today in the initial conversations, and we'll make sure to continue that as the event concludes as well. For the last little pieces here at CAAM, so we did want to have 2 call to actions going out. We will be gathering face-to-face at the Advanced Air Mobility Symposium that ICAO is hosting in Montreal, September 9th to 12th this year. We've had a great partnership with ICAO so far in welcoming the world to Canada and want to make sure that we have a good Canadian representation there as well. And lastly, as we continue our conversation beyond today, our CAAM team will be also posting our next town hall, which is scheduled for September 26th of this year, to provide that consistent base for our national authorities of Transport Canada and NAV Canada to continue to provide updates on our pathway towards operationalization. So we know this cannot be done in silo. Each one of you in attendance have a role to play in the future of advanced air mobility across the country. So thank you for taking some time with us here today and providing the insight. Our team will be sending out the conclusion email summarizing some of the key points presented from both Adil and Alan from NAV today. So on behalf of all of us at the CAAM team, here is some of our contact information to continue the conversations offline, but appreciate the time and effort here at our town hall. Have a great rest of your day, everyone, and we look forward to speaking again soon. Take care.